Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm showing you how you can use the Spinbox, Checkbox and the radio button in Tkinter. So these are three different types of Tkinter widgets, which we will cover in this video. Now this video is part of a larger series related to Tkinter. In every video, I cover a small part of Tkinter, but you can watch this as a standalone. It's not necessary to have gone through the other videos. So without further ado, let's get started. As usual, I'm using VS Code. You can use any text editor you like or you're comfortable with. It doesn't really matter as long as you're able to run Python and use Tkinter. Alright, so here's some starter code we have in my spinbox.py. So simply I've just imported Tkinter. I have created a window object, and this window object will have the tkinter.tk. So this is the root widget in my Tkinter application. This is essentially the parent of all the other widgets. So we've talked about this before, but as a quick summary, the widgets in Tkinter follow a type of hierarchy, and this one is the parent of everything else. So it's like a very large container and everything else is contained within this widget. Now then, another thing I did is I set the title to the window. So the title is Tkinter tutorial. So you can name this anything you like. So this is just the title for our little window. And next, finally, what I did is I set a window.main loop, and we know that the main loop is an infinite loop that Tkinter executes in order to keep our app running. So as long as our app is executing, this main loop is running. Alright, so this is our starter code. Let's go ahead and start by adding a Spinbox, which is the first widget we will cover today. So all I have to do is simply initialize a variable. So I'm just going to call this spin, and it's going to be equal to Tkinter.Spinbox. So this is the class is Spinbox, and we just create an instance of this class and we named it spin. And the first variable I have to specify is the master or the parent, and in this case it will be window. So window is the parent of this widget. And finally, what I need to do is I need to place this in my screen. Why is that? We know in Tkinter, anytime you need to use any widget, you always have two steps. You have to create the widget from whatever class it is from, and then you have to place it in your screen using either pack, place, or grid. So these are the geometry or layout managers. I have a separate video on those, but for simplicity's sake, we're going to use pack, which means it will just place it in our screen and will center it kind of. So this is what we're going to do. You can, of course, have more complex interfaces, use the grid, but this is not the purpose of this video. I'm just trying to show you how these widgets work. Alright, so I have created my Spinbox. Now, if I run this, as you can see, I have a Spinbox that was created right here. So if you resize the window, you can see that it stays centered. This is because of the pack. The Spinbox itself is empty, so there is nothing in it. These buttons, I click them, nothing really happens. We haven't really specified anything yet, but this is the very first step. Now, one thing I do want you to note, the Spinbox in Tkinter is just an entry widget. So we talked about the entry, in which it's like a text entry where you can type stuff. You can type anything in the Spinbox. Now, of course, later on when you're using this and you're binding it to variables and things like that, you kind of have to be careful what you type and maybe handle some errors. But I'm not going to go into too much detail here because this isn't the purpose of this tutorial. I'm just trying to show you how you can use the Spinbox. But what you have to keep in mind is the Spinbox, it's essentially just an entry with some buttons attached to it, and these buttons can perform different actions. Alright, so we have our Spinbox, it's empty, nothing is in it. How do we add some values? Well, we're going to add some values using two different attributes that you have to specify here. The first one is from, and let's say 0. We're going to start with the value 0, and then 2. So I'm going to say from 0 to 100. So what does that mean? Here I'm saying that my Spinbox can range from the value 0 to the value 100. So now if I run this, you can see we have 0. Now I can, of course, increase it. The default increment will always be 1. So sorry about the cursor, but this is how I'm increasing my value. Now, another thing you can do is you can change the increment. So this is increment, and you can have it be maybe 0.1 rather than increase by 1 every single time. So now you can see the value is 0.0, and you can increase it as you go using the buttons. Okay, so now if I reduce it, it cannot go beyond 0 because we specified the from to be 0. Alright, So this is sort of the basic way that the Spinbox works. Another thing that you can do is if you don't want to set any maximum value, you can just simply say infinity, which is how Python represents the infinity, and you can just increase it. So I think, okay, never mind. The increment should be removed in this case. And there we go. So now you can see you can increase it as much as you want. So you can definitely surpass the 100 mark. So I'm just going to keep this going. Yeah, so my bad. You have to remove the increment in case of using infinity. All right, so now that we have sort of played around with the values and set the increment as well, the next thing we're going to do is see how you can actually change this from being a range of numbers to a list of values. Now, what do I mean in this case? So the Spinbox itself, let me just run it again so you can actually see it. Here you're just incrementing these numbers and you have these values. However, it can actually be a list of strings or other types of variables. What do we mean by this? Well, there's another parameter here that you can specify, which is called values. And values will take as input a list. And now let's say I'm just going to type some random stuff. So hello, hi, and yes, and no. So this is just some example stuff. And what values will do is it will overwrite the from and the to. So it will overwrite this range, and then it will just include a set of these guys in the Spinbox. So now if I run it, you can see the Spinbox says hello. If I go upward, it says hi, and then it says yes and no. And downward, it will just go through the same list over and over again. So this is another option that you can use. Do I need to keep this stuff here? No. As I said, it overwrites them. So even if we do include the from and the to, they just won't be processed. However, you can remove them and run it again, and you will get the same results. Okay, so this is how you sort of use the basics of this Spinbox. Now, obviously, if you're using a Spinbox, you want to record its values in some way or another. To do so, you would create a variable. So here I'm just going to say my variable will be called spin variable, and it will be equal to tkinter.string_var. So what is string var? It's a string variable. So this will contain some information from one of your widgets. And how do I do so? Here I will simply specify variable. Actually, it's here, it's text variable, my bad. So here you go. And then it will be equal to spin var. Okay, so now I have created this variable. I specified it in the text variable. For now, if I run it, there is no difference to me as a user. I can still perform the same things. What's the next thing we're going to do? We're going to add the command parameter. So what is command? Now, if you've seen my previous video on buttons, command essentially is what it handles the events. It's a callback function, so it tells me which function I have to go to once an event occurs. In the case of a button, the event is I clicked on the button, so I will execute this command. Here, in this case, while I clicked on one of the two mini buttons that I have in my Spinbox, if I click on them, I will execute this command. And so my command will be equal to something called spin pressed. And now I will just simply go here and define spin pressed as a function. Okay, and what I'm going to do with spin pressed, I will simply say print our spin variable dot get. Okay, so here it will get me the value of the spin variable. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this and show you what we did. Okay, so now we still have the same Spinbox. Now if I just press the button, you will see that hi was printed here. So once it gets pressed, it will print out the new value of the spin. Here you go. So again, we pressed yes, no, and so on. So even if I continue pressing, it will continue to press no. I go down, it will print yes. Okay, so this is how you're able to record the value of this Spinbox. So why is this important? Because later on, when you design a large form, and let's say, for example, a user is entering their age or something of that, you know, some kind of variable like that, you want to save it and later on record it somewhere. So how do you record it? You will have to use this string variable, which will record this variable from this Spinbox And then rather than print it here, you will have to save it somewhere and do something with it. So that will be up to you. Okay, so that's it for the Spinbox. This is our first widget. Now the second widget we're going to talk about today is something called the checkbox. So the checkbox is something I'm pretty sure you're familiar with. Now let's see how we can use it. So again, we have the very same starter code. I defined my window, I defined a title for my window, and I'm running the main loop to execute my application. So I will just create a variable called check, and it will be equal to Tkinter.checkButton. So actually the most common name is a checkbox because this is what it's called in a variety of languages and UI frameworks and design principles and things like that. But in Tkinter, it's actually called a check button. The reason for this is because the checkbox itself is very similar to how a button works, with like an additional sort of trait. I'm just going to talk about that in a second. But for now, let me show you how it looks like. So again, I'm just going to have the simplest form of the check button. So the parent is window. Again, this is a hierarchy. My box is a window, and then I'm placing all my widgets inside of it. So now let me run it. And of course, I forgot to do one very important thing, which is to pack it to my screen. Again, in Tkinter, you have two steps. You create the widget, and then you have to place it in your screen. So now if I run it, you can see that I have this check button right here. So why is it called a check button in Tkinter? Like I said, it works similar to a button. It's something that's pressable, it's clickable, it's very similar to a button. However, one additional thing that the check button has is that it stores a value. So here it's sort of like this yes or no value depending on whether or not it's checked, whether it's actually toggled. So you can toggle it to be on or off, or checked and unchecked. And this is an important trait of the check button and sort of makes sense why they would call it a check button. All right. So now that I've just added to the root, you can see, I mean, it's pretty simple. There's nothing in the interface. One thing I can add is the text. So here I can just say text, and I will say check me. And now you can see the check button has this textual label next to it. Okay. So of course, again, similar to what we did with the Spinbox, we want to be able to record this value. Now, how do I do so? Again, I'm just going to create a string variable, and this will be called checkVar. Now you can name these guys anything you want. And I'm just going to say Tkinter.stringvar. Okay, so this is my variable. And here, I'm just going to come here and I'm going to define variable is equal to checkVar. So this variable will be bound to my check button, and it will save the value of what is currently pressed or not pressed. What are the values? So we did say that here, there is a checkbox, but how do the values differ? Where is the value? How does it store whether this is checked or unchecked? Well, there are two different variables that you have here. You have the on value, and you have the off value. So it's pretty intuitive, very similar to what it sounds like. The on value is the value that this check button will hold once it is, while it is actually checked. So the whole time in which it's checked, it will contain this on value. And then the whole time that it's unchecked, it will contain the off value. So for me, I'm just going to save the on value to be yes, and the off value to be no. So this is pretty intuitive. Okay, so for now, if I run it, again, no difference to us as a user because we're not really recording it in any way. So what else can we do? Again, we can use the command function. So command, actually not the function, the property command, and it will tie us to a function. I'm just going to call the function check pressed. Again, here it will handle the event that, okay, something got checked or unchecked actually, and then this will call the function check pressed. So I'm just going to define the function check pressed, and now what I will do is I will simply print out that check variable dot get. So here I want to get the value of this check variable. Okay, so now let me run it again, and let me just increase this guy. And okay, so by default it's checked. Now if I uncheck it, okay, let me uncheck it, it will print out no. So at first it was yes, then once I unchecked it, it was no. So now let me check it again, it prints out yes. So what's happening here, every time it gets clicked or pressed, the command will call the function check pressed, and it will print out this variable get. Once it is checked, we have the on value, which is yes. Once it's off checked, it will be like that. It will be, we have the off value no. Another thing I can do, I can press on the text here. So, and it will also check it or uncheck it. So the whole thing is pressable, including the textual part. Okay, so this is the check button. The last thing we're going to do is the radio button. It's actually pretty similar to the check button. Let me just close this and you'll see how in a second. So I'm just going to create the most basic version of the radio button again. Again, we have the same starter code. So I'm just going to say radio is equal to Tkinter dot radio button. And this will have the window as its master, so its parent. And then I'm just going to simply pack it to my screen. And now I will simply run this. And you can see we have this radio button right here. So I can't really uncheck it because in a default set of radio buttons, always there has to be one of them that is actually checked. So for now, one button, no text, nothing. This is how the radio button will look. So how do I create multiple buttons and how do I relate them all to the same value? So here's what I have to do. Again, I have to define a string variable. So similar to what we did in the previous two examples, here you go. So we have the string var. So this variable will contain the value of my radio buttons. So now what I'm going to do is I will simply specify here variable equals to radio var. All right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify the text of this radio button. And I'm just going to simply say, let's maybe select some months. So let's just say June, since we're in June right now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this line of code and just do it 3 more times. And this will be July. And I'm just going to have August and September. Okay. Now notice one thing. I have them all equal to the same variable, which is radio var. So they're all associated with this variable. Now you may stop and ask me here, wait, how are 4 different radio buttons associated with the same variable? Doesn't the variable contain the value of this radio button the same way before it contained the value of the checkbox or the spinbox? Yes, it does contain the value. However, here, in the case of radio buttons, the value will change between this set of radio buttons. So it will contain the value of one of these guys. So now let me run it. Okay, let me actually run it. And you can see, okay, I actually forgot to pack, I actually saved them all in the same variable and I forgot to pack them. So I'm just going to call them like this. And not very nice naming, but anyways, so yes. So again, you have to pack them onto your screen. You can't just create them and not pack them or place or grid. So you need to use a geometry manager to position your widget on the screen. So what just happened? What was the mistake I made? I mean, I do keep my mistakes in sometimes in videos because it might help in your case if you did the same mistake. So what actually happened, I had them all saved to the same variable, which is definitely an issue. So they were all called radio. So I just created 4 different variables. And then now that we have 4 radio buttons saved in 4 different variables, you have to pack each one separately. So yeah, that's really the mistake that happened. So now you can see we have all 4 different radio buttons. Now what's the issue that you can see right here? Well, they are all clicked because essentially they're all related to the same variable. Well, isn't that counterintuitive? Isn't that against what we were just discussing? Yes. Well, what's the issue here? We're missing another key part of the radio button. This is the value property. So we need to assign a value to each radio button so that once one of these guys is clicked, the value is different for all the others and they are not clicked. So how do we do so? Well, I'm just going to come here and I'm just going to say value. Let's say the value is equal to the same thing. So let's say June month, actually, to keep it different. So I can show you how the text is different from the value. So the value for this one is equal to July month. And then I'm just going to do the same thing for the other 2. So value is equal to August month. Okay. Again, I'm just going to do the same thing here. And this will be September month. So why am I doing this? Now that I've associated a value with each of these radio buttons, I can run the code again. And you can see that I can actually check or uncheck one of these guys. Okay, So now, because there are different values, I cannot check more than one of them at the same time. Okay, perfect. Now that I've actually saved all the values inside the radio buttons, what's the next thing I have to do? I need to use the command. So the command, again, it will tie me to a function. Once one of these radio buttons is pressed, this function will execute, and then let's say we will print out the value of radio variable. So let me just, before that, highlight the difference between text and value. Text is the text that you see actually when we run it. So this is the text you see on the list. So let me just erase the command and actually just get back to the text. So you can see June, July, August. Now by default, they're all checked, but actually when we press on one of them, the others will be toggled. And this June month, July month, August month, and September month, they will all actually be stored internally. So they will be stored inside this radio variable, which is our string variable. Okay, more on that in a second, because now I'm going to show you how we will use command. So again, command, and I'm just going to say go to radio pressed, which is the function. And then I'm going to assign the same command to all 4 of the radio buttons. So again, I'm just going to paste this and then do the same thing here. So radio pressed is highlighted because it doesn't exist yet. So I'm just going to go define radio pressed as a function. And once I have defined it, what I'm going to do is simply just print out radio variable dot get as usual. And now let's run it and see what we get. Let me just scroll down here. If I just press on July, you can see it prints out July month and not July. Okay, now if I press on August, let me scroll down and it will print out August month. So why does it print out the month? Because it's printing out the value. So value is what will go to this radio variable. It's what will be stored inside of it as we are executing this application. So as you execute, as you press the different radio buttons and select one of these and toggle the others, the value of the pressed radio button will be stored inside the radio variable. All right, so that's really it for the radio button, as well as the checkbox and the spinbox. Now, I hope you found this video useful. Do let me know if you did, and stay tuned for the next videos in this series in which I cover more of these widgets inside Tkinter. So for now, we covered these 3 widgets. We've previously covered the button, entry, and label, as well as we talked a bit about the hierarchies and the geometry managers. So this video, we covered these 3 additional widgets. More to come, hopefully. And yeah, that's really it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Bye bye.